I am of the relatively firm opinion that Hisoka would make an excellent opponent for Netero. Potentially. And honestly, I think you think so too. Potentially. The issue is that when you think of Hisoka versus Netero, you think of this Netero, the one who fought Meruem one-on-one at the end of the Chimera Ant arc, and gave the Chimera Ant King a moderate level challenge before making him painfully aware of humanity's infinite potential for both evolution and malice. However, I am not talking about that Netero. I'm not even talking about this Netero, who got his groove back after getting fed soldier and officer level Chimera Ants by Nov and Moral during the middle of the Chimera Ant arc. I'm talking about this Netero. The Netero that interviewed Hisoka all the way back during the tail end of the Hunter exam arc. And the only Netero Hisoka ever met and evaluated. Allow me to explain my reasoning. This argument relies on two main premises. The first is that the Netero we saw in the Hunter exam arc and the beginning of the Chimera Ant arc is significantly less powerful than the Palace Invasion Netero we saw near the end of the CA arc. Actually, as the introduction implied, I think we need to separate Netero into three distinct versions of himself with regards to power. To start in reverse with the most powerful one, we have the Palace Invasion Netero. This Netero is a nigh unparalleled god of destruction, a point which I think doesn't require much elaboration. After spending time atop a mountain peak, meditating and gathering his former strength in order to empower himself and prepare Zero Hand, he was able to hold his own against an entity that would have made short work of literally any other human Nen user we've seen thus far, barring a transformed Gon, placing him either at or reasonably close to his prime strength. By the way, if you're interested in the reasons I believe this version of Netero was comparable to himself in his prime, I delve more into the mechanics of what Netero did as well as its relation to Gon's transformation in my previous video. Back on topic, there exists no human opponent that we have seen in action thus far who stands a chance of surviving a duel against the former chairman. There are potential contenders, of course, such as Beyond Netero and Jing and Dawn Freaks, based on their reputation and legend alone, as well as 4th Prince Terror Sandwich depending on the exact properties of his Hatsu and Guardian Spirit Beast, but that's a discussion for another time. Without sufficient prep time, perfect info on the 100 type Guanyin Bodhisattva, outside help, or the perfect ability to serve as a counter, there's no human opponent that can last for more than a few moments, let alone actually take on this version of the Hunter Association chairman. That includes Crawl, by the way. Should Hisoka have fought him, even under Hisoka's own ideal circumstances, he would have been splattered across the pavement into a fine pink bungee gummy mist in a matter of 2 or 3 slaps, i.e. before he could even blink. The second version of Netero is the one we saw the least of. This is him when he got his groove back and primed himself for a 1v1 against a worthy opponent. This version of Netero also explicitly showcased his power to Colt when he asked the Chimera Ant officer how he compared to the Ant King. As I'm sure you remember, Colt retorted that he wouldn't even make it past a royal guard, piquing Netero's battle lust and leading to his decision to undergo an additional power-up before facing the king. While not on the level of his Palace Invasion version, this iteration of Netero saw him get significantly buffer, owing to his aforementioned dismantling of numerous ants in Nov's pocket space, which translated to a significant spike in overall aura capacity and output. Improvement in physical condition is an excellent indicator of a Nen user's increased power and competency, especially in enhancers. In other words, this was a Netero that got back in shape, while the version of himself that fought Meruem was him going beyond what should have been possible for him at his advanced age of 110 plus. Despite this, Moral and Nov were awed when the chairman displayed his Ren, with Moral describing the sensation of being in close proximity to it as getting pierced by needles, and recognizing the fact that Netero was was indeed in a completely different league. Colt, however, having already witnessed the royal guards and the king up close, wasn't quite as impressed, as stated. Nonetheless, for human and most Chimera Ant standards, this Netero was an absolute beast. But I'll talk more about his potential fighting capabilities in a moment. Let's first go over the final and least powerful version of Netero. If you'll recall, when Netero, Morl, and Nov first set their sights on Pito, Netero remarked that the Royal Guard was more powerful than him, and teased the two hunters about being at less than half his prime power, which regrettably made him on par with them. Morl stated that this was him trolling, as usual, as he recognized that the chairman was still reasonably stronger than them, even in this least powerful version of himself. Considering how competent we know Nov and Morl are, being significantly above average hunters while not being quite Zodiac level according to Kanzai, I'd say this puts an out-of-shape Netero at about average Zodiac level when it comes to pure aura output and physical stats. I have a whole video where I go into detailing on how we can numerically scale these characters using Hisoka's grading system, so feel free to check it out later for more info. Now, if an out-of-shape Netero is around average Zodiac level in aura and physical stats, I think it's fair to say that an in-shape Netero would leave in the dust all but the most powerful of Zodiacs, namely Jing. That alone should speak volumes. While he may not consider himself as being among the top 5 Nen users of this time, I believe that an in-shape Netero definitely cracks the top 10, while the Netero that fought Meruem may very well crack the top 5, depending on how close to his once prime power he really was. Now, before discussing how Hisoka would fare against the in-shape and out-of-shape versions of Netero respectively, we need to finally go over the second main premise. Can both of these versions of Netero use the 100 type Guanyin Bodhisattva? Because if they can, in any capacity, as in, let's say that the out-of-shape version can only use the first hand, we can just stop the discussion here. While I don't think a single strike from the first hand kills Hisoka outright, since he is both remarkably strong and sturdy for a non-enhancer, a single strike would leave him at least close to moderately injured, and fighting at a significantly diminished capacity. The Bodhisattva isn't something you can dodge, and I see him looking like Phaeton following his battle with Zazan. Except while Phaeton won that hard-fought battle, a single strike from the merciful goddess would most likely leave Hisoka battered and bruised with a shattered arm, broken ribs, and either an annihilated ego or a throbbing swing. However, since he's recently spoken about how what he wants most is a partner to ravage, I think he'd at that point view Netero more as a force of nature than a person he can, dance with. What Hisoka wants is a partner, but this would be a one-sided bitch-slapping session, so my money is on the annihilated ego. However, can both of these versions indeed use the Bodhisattva? We know that only the final version that fought Meruem could use Zero Hand, since preparing himself for its use was one of the main reasons Netero isolated himself for weeks atop that mountain. But what about hands 1 through 99? I am of the personal opinion, and this is just my intuition at this point, we really have no way of knowing for sure either way, that while the in-shape version can indeed utilize the Bodhisattva, the out-of-shape version most likely cannot. I believe this to be the case for 3 reasons. A. Netero attained the 100 type Guanyin Bodhisattva by breaking his mental and physical barriers and achieving enlightenment through martial arts. It was a blessing he manifested by striving to self-actualize himself as a martial artist beyond what his limitations should have allowed. Meaning that this Hatsu is in a way a symbol of peerless eminence. As such, I don't believe Netero would tarnish its symbolism by ever attempting to use it when he saw himself as unworthy of it as a martial artist. B. I suspect it requires an immense amount of aura to manifest, and considering just how hard it hits and how much it relies on categories outside Netero's innate one, an out-of-shape Netero may not have enough aura output to manifest it. Remember that there's a difference between the amount of aura one possesses and the amount of aura they can utilize and output at once while in combat. And C. Zeno stated that the Bodhisattva was by far his most deadly ability in combat, implying that he had a few more Hatsu up his sleeve which we never had a chance to see. All this tells me is that unless ready to face a worthy foe and give it his earnest best, Netero would never resort to using the Bodhisattva, but would rely on the repertoire of skills and abilities he's accumulated and developed throughout his long life and martial arts career. This may very well have been a full-on self-imposed vow and limitation for the Bodhisattva's use. I think it'd be very much in line with his character. With all that said, let's bring this point to a close. An in-shape Netero using the 100 type Guanin Bodhisattva absolutely obliterates Hisoka from the face of both the known and unknown worlds. Honestly, even if he can't use the Bodhisattva, or let's just say he won't use it, the difference in physical power, aura capacity and output, experience, and overall skill, in my mind, makes it so that this version of Netero doesn't really even need to rely on the Bodhisattva to put Hisoka in his place. I think that without it, both Hisoka and Netero would have a blast duking it out, as Hisoka slowly realized just how outclassed he really was, as Netero gradually stopped messing around and ramped up the pressure. The fight would end with Netero taking some light to moderate damage if he was really letting Hisoka enjoy himself a bit before Hisoka would be killed while experiencing a swing on a magnitude he never dreamt of as possible. He would have found his ideal dancing partner, but would have ended up being the one ravaged. Now, an out-of-shape Netero versus Hisoka is nowhere as one-sided as people think. Though, to be fair, most people also believe that Netero can use the Bodhisattva even in this form, and while that may be possible, as I've argued, I personally don't believe that's the case, and will be working off that assumption. This is the second main premise we need to take up. An out-of-shape Netero cannot use the Bodhisattva. Now, if we assume that Hisoka's evaluation of the Zodiacs during the chairman election was reflective of their abilities, we can average out their rating as being around an 8.4. By the way, this scale assumes that Hisoka humbly rates himself at a 10. As such, if we can assume that the aforementioned 8.4 average is at least mostly representative of the Zodiacs, we can place an out-of-shape Netero around that level as well. This would make him at a level where he could spar with the Zodiacs, which was one of their functions, while not simply overwhelming most of them. It's worth noting that an out-of-shape Netero would almost certainly grow more powerful as a prolonged fight went on, since he'd begin to get his groove back throughout it. If you'd like further clarification on why this 8.4 rating for Netero makes sense to me, even if you think it's low, I encourage you to check out the aforementioned video. Yet further evidence of this is Hisoka's and Netero's interaction during the Hunter exam arc. There, Hisoka plainly tells the chairman that the one he wants to fight most on the Zeppelin is him. Netero, of course, completely ignores his bloodlust and dismisses the clown. But it's worth pointing out that Hisoka isn't brought to ecstasy at standing so close to Isaac freaking Netero. While he does display an urge to fight the chairman, he doesn't drop everything so as to not miss such a golden opportunity. No, he stays calm and collected and proceeds with the Hunter exam. Even after it's done, he doesn't even try to go after Netero. His fixation remains on Chrollo, who he obviously still deems as his ultimate dance partner. Considering Hisoka's perceptiveness and ability to evaluate people's capabilities, I think it's fair to assume that he viewed Netero as a worthy opponent, but not on the level level where he'd drop everything or invest years just to pursue him. By the way, in the aforementioned video, I mentioned how Netero's nen was incredibly silent, and that may have given Hisoka the wrong impression as to his true power. That's not correct and has never been stated to be the case. Zeno did say that Netero's aura was silent, but in the sense that it was nigh impossible to predict what he was going to do next by analyzing his aura flow, not in the sense that it made his power difficult to gauge. With all that said and established, an out-of-shape Netero without the Bodhisattva and with a lesser capacity and physical prowess when compared to Hisoka would make a genuinely good opponent for the Murder Magician. Instead of raw power, he'd have to rely on his vastly deeper experience pool and immensely more refined skill set paired with the use of his unknown Hatsu in order to come out the victor. I think this would be a genuinely hard-fought match, but I still believe that the difference in experience and nen mastery, Netero's so goddamn skilled that even a veteran like Zeno can't read his aura flow, together with the fact that Netero would gradually get back in the groove and ramp up the pressure as the battle went on, still means the cunning old man with the satellite ears comes out the victor after a prolonged and difficult fight. Though, unlike with any other version of him, I actually think that Hisoka has a chance to come out the victor under the right circumstances. I'd say an out-of-shape Netero wrecks, with substantial difficulty, the Murder Magician 9 times out of 10. Well, I'm really looking forward to the comments in this one. Bring 'em on. No, but seriously, did I manage to convince you that Hisoka at least has a chance against an out-of-shape Netero? Because I genuinely think he does, and that people greatly underplay Netero's advanced age and, out-of-shapeness. Lin Orduver, I can't speak French, who while being younger than him is close to Netero in age, is borderline catatonic. Netero, retaining his physical and mental capabilities as much as he has, is a tremendous feat in its own right. But I've already said my piece. As always, thank you very much for watching. Your feedback is always appreciated. Subscribe if you like more content like this. I'd like to thank Kamaswami for going the extra mile in supporting the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.